Hi friends, welcome back to the Meditative Aiden YouTube channel where we talk about mindfulness and how it can help you work through the challenges and experiences of everyday life. My name is Aiden and today's video is on working with anger. So in today's video we're going to talk about what anger is, when it's a good thing, when it can be a bad thing, and then we're going to talk about some of the underlying processes that make anger difficult to experience and make it worse. After that, we're going to talk about the RAIN method, which is how we're going to approach working with anger. And then we're going to talk about, wrapping it all together and communicating with others when we're angry. Before we get into today's video, I want to remind you guys that if you enjoy watching the Meditative Aiden YouTube channel, to subscribe and give this video a like. Don't forget that you can also listen to the full audio version of this at the Meditative Aiden Podcast. And you can check out the full blog article at the Meditative Aiden website on our blog page. So let's get into today's video without any further ado. So anger is something that can become a really destructive force really quickly if we let it get out of control. Anger is something that, when it comes up very quickly and with a lot of intensity and a lot of passion. It's kind of like getting swept up into just this waterfall of emotion that carries you to some destination. And all of us are familiar with the guilt we feel after saying something while angry that, wasn't too kind or offended somebody even more than maybe we intended. And we also know a lot of stories about where people are getting angry, on the side of the road because of tailgating or something like that, or getting cut off. These stories involve people getting out of their cars to confront each other and one of them pulling out a weapon and killing the other. Anger is really powerful and it causes us to do a lot of crazy things. But the thing is that it is totally normal to feel angry. Fundamentally, anger is part of our basic human emotion system. It's involved with happiness, sadness, disgust, and those basic terms in psychology where they say, these emotions are the same across every single ethnicity across the world. Why is this? Why is it that anger can be, such a destructive force, but it's a part of our humanity? One of the big reasons is because our ancient ancestors actually needed anger to help them survive in their dangerous and threatening world. Anger is part of our fight, flight, or freeze response system. So what this means is that when our ancestors were in a dangerous environment, when they were, threatened or, their life was in danger, anger would come up to invoke the power of our, nervous system in that fight, flight, or freeze response so that their brains would get flooded with adrenaline, which would allow them to act in a way that allowed them to survive. The issue, though, in the modern world is that when we constantly feel anger in non-threatening situations where our life really isn't in danger, where our anger response in that fight, flight, or freeze system is really being hijacked. So what happens, for example, is, you get cut off on the freeway and that anger comes up. And what happens is that, emotional response, that response of your fight, flight, or freeze system releases all of that adrenaline, which short circuits your brain so you can't think as clearly in the situation. And the thing is that if you hold on to anger for a long time, if you're angry for a very long period of time, and we're talking months to years, maybe even weeks, it causes damage to your body. And it actually reduces the activity in your brain and destroys your gut health and dampens your immune system. And on top of that, it damages our social relationships and the way that we experience the world. Again, the reason that this is dangerous is because if someone is tailgating you on the freeway, there's not really a need for survival there. You're not really in danger of dying unless that person is intentionally trying to kill you. But the thing is, the way that your brain perceives it, the way that you perceive it, considers it a threat so that it engages that response and causes you to behave that way. So we're going to use an example to kind of go through how to work through this and some of the processes behind this angry response. So let's imagine that you're trying to go to the mall or something, and you pull into the parking lot and it is jam-packed. For whatever reason, you just chose the busiest day to go to the mall. So you're wandering around for a few minutes trying to find a parking space, and finally, after so much searching, you find someone that's walking to their car, and so you wait patiently, you turn on your blinker, and you wait for that person to pull out. And as this person pulls their car out, someone else swoops in and takes your spot from you. Now, if you're like me, this can lead to explosive rage, because on the one hand, you just spent all that time waiting, and on the other hand, where are you going to find another parking spot? But on top of that, it wasn't fair for them to behave that way. And that's really where the basis of anger lies. It's when some situation makes us feel like we're being treated unfairly. And it's this lack of justice that really propagates and pushes forward that emotion to such dramatic levels of, violence and damage to our bodies. But there are a few underlying thought processes in particular that cause this to happen. The first of which is overgeneralizing, which uses statements like never and always, these really concrete statements, making it sound like something always happens. And what happens with this is, that person takes your spot and you say, oh, this always happens to me. I can never find a good parking spot. What's the deal? And the danger with overgeneralization is, one, it engages that angry response, that sense of anger, to flare up a little more dramatically. And furthermore, it pushes in that sense of anger a little more deeply and entrenches you further in it, because you're assuming that you're being treated unfairly all the time. And when you perceive that, it causes you to, your response is to get even more angry because you want justice, you want to be treated fairly. And according to this overgeneralization, you are never treated fairly. The second thought process involves mind reading. What this means is that we're making assumptions about how other people are thinking in situations, and also assuming that they know what we're thinking during situations. So in this experience where someone takes our parking spot, this means that you're looking at that person and saying, don't they know that I was waiting for that parking spot? Did they have no idea? Did they not see me right here? On top of that, thinking about don't they know that I had a right to be here? Don't they know that I have things to do just like they do? The difficulty with mind reading is that it makes it sound like you're the victim. It really doesn't take into account all of the factors that are going into a situation that cause anger to arise. You're really making yourself the center of this attention so that, everything revolves around you. This doesn't take into consideration any of the environmental factors, or maybe just giving someone the benefit of the doubt. The danger with this, again, is that it makes it that much easier to get angry and to intensify that response that's angry. So these first two thought processes kind of underlie what happens when we're in the situation. That's what's happening in the moment that someone's taking our parking spot. But afterwards, let's say that we finally found a parking spot later and we, are walking through the mall and we're constantly thinking about it and we're constantly reflecting on the fact that that person behaved that way. This is called rumination, and rumination is one of the most powerful factors that leads to, anger lasting for so long. And what happens when you ruminate about these situations is it causes your brain to experience that event over and over and over again. So what it's doing is it's re-engaging your fight, flight, or freeze response to release even more adrenaline even when the situation isn't happening. The danger with this is that over time, when you ruminate for long enough and you feel these sensations long enough, you can develop that habit of anger that really starts to damage your body. So referring back again to how adrenaline short circuits our minds, what it does is it takes energy away from the parts of our brain that are engaged in planning and making deliberate decisions and puts that right into, this area of our brain that we can't really control. What this really does is makes it so that we act without a really great sense of clarity and without a great sense of intention either. We're really acting from a place that's more animalistic, where we're just reacting to a situation. So with these three things on top of this short circuiting, this can become really dangerous because it becomes a really autonomous response. It's really natural, and it's something that, without a proper level of awareness, we can't control. And this is where mindfulness comes in, to help us take a look at these processes, to take a look at rumination and short circuiting, to help us understand how we can break free from anger, to experience the situation a little more level-headedly, to resolve it in a more appropriate way. What I recommend for dealing with anger and sensations of anger when they arise is the RAIN method. You might have heard me talk about this before, but the RAIN method, just in review, is a method that was developed by a group of mindfulness teachers and instructors specifically for the purpose of helping us understand how to apply mindfulness practices into these situations that are difficult. So that includes situations such as anger, depression, fear, and so on. Now, before we get into the RAIN method, there's one thing that you need to do when you're feeling angry to help out with this situation that is going to make the biggest difference. And that very first step, as much as I hate to hear this when I'm angry, is to take a deep breath. And taking a deep breath has a few different purposes. The first one is to actually prevent you from acting on that sense of anger and pursuing it. And if you're taking more than one breath, which I recommend taking like 10, which is recommended generally across the board. As you take these breaths, it allows you to really let that anger simmer down, and it allows you to see the situation a little more clearly. On top of that, taking deep breaths disengages your fight, flight, or freeze response to reduce the amounts of adrenaline that are coursing through your system in that moment. So overall, taking a few deep breaths very first gives you a little more space to let that anger simmer down, and also reduces that adrenaline so that you can proceed with the RAIN method a little more clearly with a greater sense of calm rather than just burning passion. Because it's really hard to go through mindful practices when you're feeling intense passionate emotions like anger. So the first letter in the RAIN acronym is R, which stands for recognize. What this means is that we're recognizing the anger when it arises. This step doesn't involve any analysis or asking questions or anything like that. We're really just taking the time to bring our awareness to what we're feeling. So at this point you might ask yourself, what is it that's happening inside me right now? What do I feel? And the purpose of that question isn't to investigate really what caused the situation to arise or how you're going to cope with it. It's just bringing your attention to the situation. And what this does is it allows us to kind of bring our brain back into a place where we can make conscious decisions, so that we're bringing our consciousness back into the situation instead of acting, just without any intention and acting mindlessly. So in the situation where, someone's taken our parking spot, what we might do using this first step in the RAIN method is recognize, I'm feeling a little bit of anger right now. I'm feeling a lot of anger right now. And I feel it here in my chest, and it makes me want to do this. And that's it. That's all you have to do, is just recognize the sensation that's come up and the moment that it's come up in. The second letter of the RAIN acronym is acknowledge. What this means is that we're acknowledging the anger and allowing it to arise. Now this step might seem a little like backwards, because if you're allowing it to arise and you're just sitting in it, it might sound like you're just letting the anger stew. But what this really means is that after you've recognized this sense of anger, you're allowing yourself to just acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge its presence and the weight that it bears. In particular, this step emphasizes that we're not acting on that sense of anger and not doing anything irrational. Rather, we're trying to take a step back to just become aware of this sense of anger and where it's coming from. The idea here is that we're trying to become neutrally aware of this sensation, seeing it as a different part of ourselves rather than, believing that we are an angry person or something like that. So in our experience with the parking lot, what this might look like, that person takes our spot, we first recognize it, we go through that part. Acknowledging it might look something like this. It's okay for me to feel angry, it's okay for me to feel this sensation, but I'm not going to get wrapped up in it. I'm just going to observe this emotion as it arises and how it makes me feel inside. So these first two steps in the RAIN method are all about giving ourselves a little distance from the situation. They're all about giving ourselves some time to bring awareness to the situation and the emotion as it arises. The third step in the RAIN acronym is investigate. So this means that we're investigating the sensation of anger as it arises. In particular, we're asking questions to try to figure out, where is this anger coming from? Why am I feeling this? What happened that led to this? And on top of that, what am I doing that's making this situation worse? Or are there, parts of the situation that I'm missing? So this step specifically addresses some of those thought processes that we might not be aware of. We're asking ourselves, am I mind reading? Am I assuming too many facts about this situation? Am I making overgeneralizations that are making it worse? Or even later on down the road, do I feel like I'm ruminating about this, and why am I? Again, the purpose of this is really to come to an understanding of those thought processes, understanding the effect that they're having on us and bringing our awareness to them so that they're not just happening, in our subconscious and taking control of us and making that anger that much worse. So in the example in the parking lot, what this will look like is, we've gone through the first two steps, and we're going to ask ourselves, am I mind reading right now? Am I assuming too much? Did they really see me? Did they do this intentionally to upset me? The point is that in this situation in the parking lot, asking questions and investigating the sense of anger with more of a neutral stance is all about getting to understand this sense of anger and all of the things that are involved in it. And what this does is it gives us knowledge about the anger, gives us an understanding of the situation and how we're reacting to it. And this gives us a little more freedom to respond a little more appropriately to the situation as it arises. So I love the RAIN method. It's been an amazingly powerful and profound tool for me to use as I've worked through experiences like anger over the past couple of years. It's really helped me understand how to take a situation and apply mindfulness to it in that moment. Because it's one thing to, sit down in a chair and meditate and practice mindfulness, and it's another thing to take that practice and apply it to day-to-day situations. But there's actually one thing that I would add to this, which involves mindful, neutral communication. So the thing is that if you're feeling angry and you've gone through the RAIN method, there's still a need to communicate about it. So, in the parking lot, we might not want to confront this person that stole our spot, right? It may not actually be an option because we'll probably never see that person again. But if we're feeling angry, in our household or with someone that we know or a coworker, and we're trying to resolve this feeling, it's really important to find closure with that person. So I want you to imagine that you're at work and there's a situation where you angered someone, one of your coworkers, a lot, and they are really angry about it. But they go through the RAIN method to neutrally and mindfully work with the experience of anger to kind of let it simmer down, and they come to a place of peace where they're calm and they're collected and they're not so angry about the situation anymore. But they never talk to you about it. This situation is kind of awkward because you, as the person that, might have inflicted some of that anger, kind of you want some resolution there. You want to know that things are okay, and you're also probably going to be a little defensive too. The thing is that you need to know that things are okay. Otherwise, this kind of slight tension will exist in that relationship until that closure is obtained. So in particular, after taking a few deep breaths and going through the RAIN method, when you're ready, it's time to sit down with that person and just talk to them cordially about it. I say this because after feeling angry, it's really easy to use blaming kind of statements like, you made me feel, or you did this. And that's not super helpful, because what happens when you start pointing blame or laying blame on someone for something is they can immediately become defensive, and that can make the situation nearly impossible to work through until you guys have both had some time to cool down and understand how to communicate a little more clearly. But in particular, what I suggest is using neutral statements such as, I feel this way when this happens, or this made me feel this way when this happened. So assuming that we were actually able to talk to the person in the parking lot that stole our space, we might say, I want to have a conversation with you about this. I want you to know I'm not super angry, but I just want to work through this experience with you because I don't want to feel this sensation anymore. After that, you might say something like, it made me feel a lot of anger when my spot was taken, and this is why. You might also say, I feel a lot of anger when my parking spot is taken like that. But I'm not blaming you, I just want you to know that that made me angry. Having a conversation like this from a place of peace, stability, and a place where our mind isn't short-circuited allows us to resolve these conflicts and the sense of anger with a greater sense of clarity and purpose and overall resolution in general. It can really help us with this experience to find a clear resolution that works for us, that isn't going to result in some kind of lasting tension over time. So overall, when working with anger and working with angry emotions, mindfulness is a really powerful tool for doing this because it allows us to re-engage our brains so we're not, being short-circuited, and it allows us to respond to the situation a little more clearly and with a little more purpose. And it also allows us to change our perspectives a little bit so that we are not seeing things from, a victimized perspective. It also allows us to work through the following conversations to resolve that tension with a greater sense of clarity and peace and purpose, and just with an air of understanding. I would even argue that mindfulness is the most powerful tool for handling anger, especially because anger is such a short-circuited, immediate, passionate response to a situation. And the best counter to those kinds of things is a tool that allows you to bring more awareness to it, to dampen that level of passion so that you can communicate a little more clearly about the situation and handle it with a greater level of clarity. It brings that awareness to the situation that allows you to work through the experience, to work through the feeling of anger without getting caught on a leash. If you walk away with nothing else from this video, I hope that you've learned a method to help you work with experiences of anger. And I hope that this understanding of the RAIN method can also help you work through other experiences as well. Again, if you walk away with nothing else, that would be the most powerful tool that you could develop in mindfulness to help you mindfully deal and work through different experiences, emotions, and situations. But other than that, that wraps up today's video on anger and working with anger through mindfulness. Don't forget that if you like today's video, to give us a thumbs up below and subscribe to the Meditative Aiden YouTube channel, where we release videos on mindfulness every week. You can also listen to the full audio version of this on the Meditative Aiden Podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. And on top of that, if you're interested in reading the full blog article on working with anger, you can find that at meditativeaiden.com/blog. Other than that, guys, I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.